Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time has found you? Because tonight, we descend into H.P. Lovecraft's hidden worlds, from lost civilizations to ancient, something else, something unnamed. Beneath the ruins of dead empires and the bones of extinct species, Lovecraft imagined buried realms far older than memory. But these aren't just sunken cities. They are layers of reality itself, folded, cracked, and left to rot in the dark. In his stories, ancient places don't stay buried. They rise in dreams, they speak through ruins, they reach across time not to haunt us, but to remind us that we are temporary. Most readers focus on monsters, but the true terror lies in the places, in the cities with non-Euclidean angles, the towers carved by unknown hands, the continents that predate recorded time. These worlds don't ask to be found. They simply wait, and when they are uncovered, by accident or obsession, what emerges is never what was expected. Tonight, we're going deeper than any map allows. Through texts, fragments, and whispered histories, we'll piece together the idea Lovecraft feared most: that our world is built atop the ruins of something vaster. And those ruins are not abandoned. Stay with me, not for answers, but for the questions that come when you dig too deep. The main body begins now. Lovecraft began writing at a moment when history itself felt unstable. The early 20th century did not simply add new knowledge. It stretched time backward at an alarming rate. Archaeology was no longer confirming biblical chronologies. It was dismantling them. Between 1900 and 1930, discoveries at Knossos, Mohenjo-Daro, and later Tutankhamun's tomb suggested civilizations could vanish almost completely, leaving only fragments. Lovecraft absorbed this lesson deeply. According to his letters, he viewed humanity as a brief episode, not a culmination. His stories do not imagine progress interrupted by catastrophe, but continuity interrupted by insignificance. This reveals something profound. His hidden worlds were not inventions of fantasy, but extrapolations from a collapsing historical confidence. These ideas did not emerge in isolation. Lovecraft inherited a long tradition of lost world thinking, from Plato's Atlantis to 19th century theories of Hyperborea and Lemuria. We must pause here. Unlike adventure fiction that treated such places as recoverable wonders, Lovecraft treated them as warnings. Philosophy sharpened this turn. Darwin's timelines, Nietzsche's rejection of human centrality, and Schopenhauer's pessimism converged into a single pressure. Meaning could not survive deep time intact. Consider this carefully. When time expands, purpose thins. Lovecraft's ancient worlds embody this thinning, presenting history as accumulation without intention, persistence without reason, and survival without moral direction. Language became his primary tool for signaling this rupture. Names like R'lyeh, Kadath, and Y'Hanth are not decorative sounds. They are linguistic artifacts designed to resist familiarity. Their phonetics avoid Indo-European roots, denying readers the comfort of recognizable ancestry. This is not obscurity for its own sake, but a strategy. Words behave like fossils. They outlast speakers, cultures, and meanings. Lovecraft understood this. He paired alien names with exact coordinates, dates, and measurements, not to clarify, but to destabilize. Precision suggests comprehension. Here, it exposes its absence. The map promises orientation, yet delivers dislocation. Lovecraft's hidden worlds feel authentic because they are never presented whole. Instead, they arrive through fragments, damaged manuscripts, secondhand testimonies, and unreliable scholars. This technique borrows from historical method itself. Historians reconstruct civilizations from shards, inscriptions, and disputed sources. Lovecraft mimics that process, then removes its safety net. The past does not resolve, it recedes. His ruins do not explain themselves, they accumulate. The reader is placed in the position of a researcher who has gathered enough evidence to be disturbed, but never enough to be certain. Not a mystery to be solved, but a record that refuses closure. Examples recur across his early work. The Nameless City introduces architecture older than humanity. Dagon reveals submerged cultures mistaken for legend. The Call of Cthulhu assembles a global pattern from unrelated accounts. These are evidentiary, not climactic, moments. Notice the triad: ruins, dreams, documents. Each supplies partial access, none grant control. What happens when history is accessible but unusable? This question sits beneath the surface of his fiction. Madness follows not because the truth is monstrous, but because it is inert. It offers no role for the knower. Lovecraft's method differs sharply from earlier Gothic traditions. Gothic ruins mourn loss. Classical epics memorialize fallen ages. Lovecraft's ruins do neither. They persist without sentiment. Compared to Shelley's ruined empires or Poe's decaying houses, Lovecraft's worlds feel indifferent to being remembered at all. This distinction matters. His ancient civilizations are not tragic ancestors. They are prior occupants. Replacement, not inheritance, defines the relationship. The implication is unsettling. If others came before us without consequence, why assume we will matter more? By grounding terror in history rather than spectacle, Lovecraft reframed horror as a problem of scale. His hidden worlds are not secret places awaiting discovery, but exposed truths awaiting recognition. As we move forward, the question shifts. What happens when these ancient structures are not merely observed, but encountered through dreams, contact, and forbidden knowledge? That transition marks the movement from origins into consequences, where ideas stop resting quietly in the past and begin pressing against the present. The cultural forces behind Lovecraft's hidden worlds were already centuries old by the time he wrote them down. Western thought had long been haunted by rumors of vanished continents: Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, each proposed as a cradle for forgotten wisdom or unnatural power. But by the late 1800s, these myths merged with pseudoscience. Theosophy, with its cosmological hierarchies and lost races, transformed ancient civilizations into spiritual battlegrounds. Helena Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, 1888, described prehistoric continents populated by godlike beings, lost not through sin, but cosmic necessity. Lovecraft read such texts not with belief, but fascination. He borrowed their language while stripping away their optimism. In his hands, these stories became sterile, unfeeling histories. Not enlightenment buried, but futility exposed. Beneath the spiritual surface ran a deeper current, the philosophical collapse of anthropocentrism. Darwin's On the Origin of Species, 1859, undermined the idea of human exceptionalism. Later thinkers extended this threat. Nietzsche declared that man was a bridge, not a goal. Schopenhauer insisted that the universe had no moral structure. Lovecraft absorbed these ideas through a materialist lens. He did not invent ancient civilizations as romantic curiosities. He projected them backward as logical consequences of a universe without purpose. Civilizations rise and fall not because of divine judgment, but because they are physical processes, like mountains eroding or stars burning out. That insight turns history itself into a mechanism of dread. The industrial age deepened this shift. Technology no longer connected people to mythic pasts. It revealed their erasure. Electricity lit museums filled with artifacts from cultures already extinct. Anthropology cataloged tribes while watching them disappear. Ruins became data. This mechanized detachment appears repeatedly in Lovecraft's work. The archaeologist, the professor, the cataloger, these are not heroes. They are witnesses, displaced by what they uncover. Their tools give access, but not understanding. In stories like At the Mountains of Madness, scientific method becomes the very thing that leads to unraveling. Knowledge doesn't shield them. It places them at the edge of collapse. We must also consider the shadow of empire. Lovecraft, despite his personal xenophobia, echoed a broader cultural anxiety that Western civilization might be just another layer in a deeper historical sediment. In the early 20th century, British and French archaeologists were unearthing cities older than their own national myths. Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley rewrote the timeline of civilization. Lovecraft channeled this reversal. His stories suggest that the farther one digs, literally or intellectually, the less human the world becomes. Antiquity is not nostalgic. It is hostile. It reveals not ancestors, but others who cared nothing for our eventual arrival. Ancient places in his stories often seem designed to reject interpretation. The carvings are too vast, the cities too geometrically alien. This is not laziness or theatricality. It is ideological. Lovecraft uses architecture and language to enact philosophical pessimism. If history is unknowable, and the past was never ours, then meaning itself is provisional. One can dig forever and find only strangeness. That motif appears across global myth: the forbidden tower, the hidden chamber, the underground city. But unlike traditional myths, there is no moral frame here. No sin caused the loss. No virtue will restore it. The world is old because it is old. That's all. Here we find Lovecraft's greatest divergence from the occult and spiritual traditions that inspired him. Where others saw depth as revelation, he saw it as burial. Where Blavatsky found evolving souls, he found collapsing species. His ancient civilizations are not mystical stages in human ascent. They are failures without audience, forgotten even by the stars. This inversion is key. It replaces transcendence with decay. And from that decay, he constructs dread. Not through violence, but through duration. The longer something has existed, the more it threatens the present by showing how little it matters. As we move forward, we must ask, how does Lovecraft encode these buried histories into the very words he chooses? What does it mean to name a city in a language no human throat can form? The answer lies not in what these names tell us, but in what they withhold. In the next section, we'll descend from ideas to etymology, tracing how Lovecraft uses language itself to conjure civilizations that never needed us and would not recognize us even if we found them. Lovecraft's ancient cities do not simply appear alien, they sound alien. Their names resist memory, pronunciation, and linguistic category. Rillier, Yhanthle, Kadath, Ib. These are not placeholders. They are deliberate ruptures in phonetic familiarity, severing the reader from etymological comfort. In Western literature, names often carry symbolic resonance: Erewhon, El Dorado, Atlantis. Lovecraft goes further. His names mimic the structure of language while breaking its rules, creating the illusion of linguistic depth without offering decipherability. This simulates the experience of encountering a relic without cultural context. One can observe it. One cannot absorb it. He drew inspiration from multiple sources: Semitic root structures, Polynesian phonemes, Arabic syntax, and non-Latin alphabets. All were mined, not to imitate real languages, but to evoke an elsewhere beyond the Indo-European lineage. Relief, for example, is often discussed in fan scholarship as mimicking the Arabic rahla, journey. But Lovecraft never confirmed such origins. That ambiguity is the point. The names appear to have meaning but elude translation. They signify a civilization whose conceptual categories are incompatible with ours. This creates what scholars might call linguistic otherness, not just a different language, but a language from a fundamentally different world logic. Lovecraft frequently couples these invented names with absurdly precise coordinates. Relief, we are told, lies at 47 degrees 9 minutes south, 126 degrees 43 minutes west. This specificity does not clarify, it destabilizes. Naming something inhuman, then placing it on a human map, creates dissonance. We expect detail to equal knowledge. Here, it compounds the unknown. Consider the triadic pattern: invented name, specific location, incomplete explanation. This appears in The Call of Cthulhu, The Shadow Out of Time, and At the Mountains of Madness. Each time, language gestures toward information, but withdraws before meaning arrives. The visual depiction of language also matters. Lovecraft often describes inscriptions as spirals, fractals, or geometries, inconsistent with known alphabets. These glyphs are not symbols to be read, but structures to be experienced, indecipherable, yet clearly constructed. That is their horror. If something was written, then someone meant to communicate. But when the writing cannot be decoded, the message becomes a form of violence, legibility without comprehension. Lovecraft repeatedly returns to this image: ruins covered in glyphs, codices in forgotten tongues. He turns language into archaeology and then denies access to the excavation. We must pause here. Language in Lovecraft is not merely symbolic. It is ontological. It defines what can be thought. His ancient words name things the human brain cannot fully conceptualize. This reveals something profound. Lovecraft understood that vocabulary sets the limits of perception. If you lack the word, you cannot hold the idea. His invented terms hint at concepts that do not translate, not because they are secret, but because they are structurally incompatible with human cognition. In this way, linguistic horror becomes a kind of philosophical horror. The world is not just unknown, it is unknowable in principle. This also explains his recurring use of non-native scripts, dead tongues, and unreliable translations. Texts like the Necronomicon are always mediated, quoted by madmen, interpreted by scholars, rarely read directly. The language cannot be trusted, but neither can its interpreters. The gap between the original and its reading becomes the very space where dread grows. Translation is not a solution, it is a corruption. We see this in the Dunwich Horror, where ancient phrases are uttered without clear referent. The words exist, their meaning escapes, and still things happen. As we move into the question of myth-building and authenticity, the issue shifts. Lovecraft's invented languages do more than describe the past. They simulate real historical forgetting. Just as civilizations leave behind potsherds and untranslatable texts, so too do his ancient beings leave traces that refuse interpretation. The next section explores how this refusal becomes a narrative strategy, how partial knowledge, unreliable scholars, and archival failure form the architecture of Lovecraft's hidden worlds. Lovecraft's hidden worlds gain their authenticity not through exposition, but through fragmentation. He never gives us the full myth. Instead, we are offered damaged manuscripts, conflicting testimonies, obscure footnotes, and scholars whose mental stability disintegrates as they search for truth. This narrative method mirrors historical inquiry itself. Ancient civilizations are not remembered. They are reconstructed from traces. Pottery shards, broken steles, half-legible inscriptions. Lovecraft replicates this process, then weaponizes it. The fragments he presents don't lead to coherence. They lead to disorientation. The more one learns, the less one understands. This inversion is not decorative. It is fundamental to his horror. His approach to myth-making consciously avoids the polished structure of classical mythology. Greek myths are morally ordered. Biblical stories offer redemptive arcs. But Lovecraft's narratives build mythologies that actively resist completion. Consider the Necronomicon. We never read it in full. We receive quotes, summaries, interpretations, all of them filtered through unreliable voices. Similarly, ancient cities like R'lyeh or Kadath are glimpsed, not explored. Their architecture is described in impossible terms. Non-Euclidean, cyclopean, wrong. This isn't just visual confusion, it's a philosophical statement. These places were not made for human eyes. Attempting to comprehend them reveals the limits of perception itself. Authenticity emerges from detail, but Lovecraft uses that detail to erode confidence. He borrows the tone of academic writing, citations, Latin phrases, obscure source references, yet the content offers no stability. When he names a manuscript or scholar, the specificity encourages belief. But those same names unravel under scrutiny. Who was von Junst? What university housed the Pennacotic manuscripts? The answer is always the same. You cannot find them. Yet they feel real because they are presented as real. This careful mimicry of scholarly tone gives Lovecraft's fictions the texture of forbidden history, not invention. We must pause here. There is a reason these ancient worlds feel more plausible than the monsters themselves. Lovecraft understood that myth, when presented as incomplete but internally consistent, produces stronger belief than myth explained in full. This technique predates him. Medieval grimoires, esoteric alchemical texts, even the biblical apocrypha thrive on partial revelation. What Lovecraft adds is a sense that the incompleteness is not due to loss, but due to the nature of the content itself. It cannot be completed. Human minds were not made to hold it. This transforms myth from a cultural artifact into an ontological threat. Notably, his hidden worlds are rarely accessed directly. They are reconstructed by professors in the Dunwich Horror, by explorers in At the Mountains of Madness, by dreamers in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. These figures act as flawed archivists, piecing together civilizations from scattered data. But unlike in archaeology, there is no moment of clarity, no Rosetta Stone. Instead, their research leads to dissolution, of memory, of self, of reason. This is the function of the archive in Lovecraft. It doesn't preserve knowledge. It corrodes the knower. As a final point, Lovecraft's myth-building introduces a dangerous symmetry. If the past is filled with civilizations older, greater, and stranger than ours, then our own existence becomes fragile by comparison. We are not building upward from ignorance. We are living on the rubble of forgotten empires. And we do not know why they fell. This historical ambiguity sets the stage for the next section. Now that we understand how these worlds were built, hidden and half revealed, we must ask, what ideas did they carry? What philosophical forces define Lovecraft's vision of reality itself? We turn next to the themes buried within these ruins: insignificance, entropy, and the unreliability of the waking world. Lovecraft's hidden worlds are not merely buried in space, they are buried in scale. The core philosophical terror in his work arises not from monsters or gods, but from a confrontation with the size of time, the indifference of space, and the limits of the human mind. His ancient civilizations are not remarkable for their achievements, but for their duration. They lasted millions of years. Their knowledge spans eons. Compared to them, humanity is a recent and irrelevant accident. This is not just a narrative backdrop, it's a metaphysical challenge. If the world has been old for this long, what claim do we have on understanding it? The first principle is insignificance. In the shadow out of time, the great race of Yith absorbs knowledge from countless species across time, including humanity. But their interest in us is cursory. We are one file in an infinite archive. The protagonist learns that his mind was displaced by a Yithian researcher, not for punishment, not for salvation, but for study. This is the horror. Not that we are hated, but that we are unimportant. As Lovecraft writes, the human race forms a mere momentary incident in the life of the cosmos. The hidden worlds reveal our place, and it is not central. It is peripheral. Entropy follows naturally. Ancient cities in Lovecraft's work do not flourish. They rot. And at the Mountains of Madness, the Elder Things built a vast Antarctic city of black stone, filled with murals and towers. But by the time the explorers arrive, it is abandoned. The Shoggoths have rebelled. The masters are dead. The city stands not as a monument, but as a warning. Evolution in this universe does not lead upward. It loops, decays, and devours itself. Even species that mastered interstellar travel fall. Time wears down everything. Lovecraft's genius lies in removing moral failure from the equation. The fall is not tragic. It is inevitable. Then comes dream reality instability, the third and most disorienting element. If knowledge of the past can be accessed through dreams, as it is in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath or The Nameless City, then the boundary between what is real and what is remembered begins to collapse. Ancient places appear first in vision, only later in waking form. This suggests that the mind is not merely perceiving hidden worlds, it may be returning to them. In Lovecraft's logic, dreams are not fantasy. They are unauthorized archives. The brain, in sleep, replays forbidden geography. The terror is not in madness. It is in accuracy. We must pause here. These three themes, insignificance, entropy, and unstable reality, do not stand alone. They reinforce one another. If we are insignificant and decay is inevitable, then any belief we hold about the world must be provisional. No worldview can survive the realization that reality does not require us. Lovecraft expresses this in The Call of Cthulhu. The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. That sentence isn't about ignorance. It's about protection. Correlating everything, seeing the pattern, leads to collapse. In Lovecraft's universe, knowledge is not illumination. It is exposure. Hidden worlds do not reveal spiritual truths or moral clarity. They reveal indifference. They dismantle any belief that time, order, or reality are stable. This is not nihilism in the vulgar sense. It is closer to cosmic pessimism, a belief that the universe is not malicious, but utterly careless. Civilizations come and go. Species, rise and fall. Only the void persists. And within that void lie ruins, still humming with the energies of things we do not understand. The longer they are hidden, the more dangerous their emergence becomes. As we move forward, we turn our attention to the beings who built these civilizations. If these philosophical forces shape the structure of Lovecraft's ancient worlds, then what of the entities who inhabited them? Who are the Old Ones, the Yithians, the Deep Ones? And what role do they play in this bleak architecture? We now descend into the nature of these builders, explorers, and conquerors, beings whose logic is older than thought, and whose memory runs deeper than history. Lovecraft's hidden worlds are defined not only by collapsed architecture, but by the entities who once animated them. These beings are not gods in any traditional sense. They are not symbols, metaphors, or allegories. They are phenomena, massive, ancient, and indifferent. Their behavior suggests intelligence without morality, memory without emotion, and creation without purpose. To analyze Lovecraft's ancient civilizations, we must first understand their inhabitants, the Elder Things, the great race of Yith, and the Deep Ones. These entities are not unified by culture or biology. They are unified by scale. Their histories span millions of years. Their presence erodes human meaning. Begin with the Elder Things. Introduced at the Mountains of Madness, these barrel-shaped star-headed beings arrived from space, established cities, and created life on Earth as a biological experiment. They are not demons or tyrants. They are scientists. Lovecraft describes their city as the oldest, largest, and most completely known example of a primal civilization. Their motives are untranslatable. They wage war with the Cthulhu spawn, enslave the Shoggoths, and gradually lose control. Nothing in their story resembles human drama. They rise, expand, decay. No triumph, no tragedy, just duration. Their civilization ends not with revelation, but with abandonment. The great race of Yith, in the shadow out of time, are time-traveling intellects who displace minds across eons. They do not conquer planets, they catalog them. Their hidden world exists in deep prehistory, where their conical bodies house consciousnesses that originated elsewhere. What they value is information, not power, not dominance, just data. The protagonist, Peasley, discovers he was abducted not by accident, but as part of a research initiative. The Yithians are archivists of oblivion. They preserve knowledge in anticipation of their own extinction. And when their doom approaches, they transfer into new hosts, abandoning their old form like a used shell. The Deep Ones, introduced in The Shadow over Innsmouth, differ from the other two. They are not travelers or scientists. They are survivors. Aquatic, amphibious, and immortal, they live beneath the sea in ancient cities like Yhanthle. They interbreed with humans to extend their influence, but their civilization predates us. The town of Innsmouth is merely a thin crust above their true domain. What makes the Deep Ones terrifying is not their appearance, but their permanence. When Innsmouth is raided, the government destroys buildings, but the ocean remains. The Deep Ones do not resist because they don't need to. Time is on their side. Each of these beings reflects a different relationship to time and knowledge. The Elder Things represent evolutionary accident, creators forgotten by their own creations. The Yithians represent memory stretched across species and epochs. The Deep Ones represent biological continuity without human morality. None are evil, none are good. They are prior. This is Lovecraft's true innovation. In traditional horror, the monster disrupts the normal. In cosmic horror, the monster reveals that normalcy never existed. These beings are not invaders. They were always here. We are the recent arrival. We must pause here. The entities in Lovecraft's mythos are often misunderstood as malevolent or godlike. But Lovecraft himself was clear. I never invented the gods in my stories. They are just natural forces that happen to be beyond human understanding. This distinction matters. Cthulhu is not a devil. Yog-Sothoth is not a creator. Nyarlathotep is not a trickster. They are cosmic structures, shapes of reality mistaken for deities. The horror comes not from what they do, but from what they are. Their existence refutes the centrality of mankind. Lovecraft's ancient beings inhabit hidden worlds not because they were banished, but because they have no need for us. Their cities are not ruins of defeat, but relics of indifference. The terrifying implication is that our awareness of them is incidental. We uncover fragments not because we are chosen, but because we are careless. In Lovecraft's universe, the line between discovery and contamination is thin. Every step into a hidden world is a step closer to dissolution. In the next section, we will explore how humans interact with these ancient presences, and why madness, not enlightenment, is the inevitable result. When a fragile mind collides with vast memory, when time loops backward and architecture defies geometry, the human brain does not expand. It breaks. What happens when people encounter civilizations that do not and cannot care whether they are seen? That is the function of madness in Lovecraft's mythos, and it is to that we now turn. In Lovecraft's mythos, humans do not discover ancient civilizations. They stumble into them. The encounter is never initiated by the past. It is the present that trespasses. Sailors, scholars, dreamers, archaeologists. These figures do not seek horror, yet they find it in deep oceans, remote deserts, and half-remembered dreams. What follows is rarely death. Instead, they are left fractured, their sanity corroded by exposure to scales of time and meaning for which they were not evolved. In this framework, madness is not an illness. It is a symptom of contact with truths the brain cannot metabolize. Consider the narrator of The Nameless City. He explores ruins that should not exist, beneath sands older than recorded history. The architecture is inhuman. The proportions are wrong. As he descends, his mind reels, not from threat, but from recognition. He is not discovering something new. He is witnessing something ancient that still persists. He escapes physically, but his worldview is altered. Lovecraft writes, "I shall never sleep calmly again." The implication is clear. Madness is the psychic cost of surviving contact. It is the residue left behind when perception expands beyond its limits. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the protagonist experiences a slower breakdown. The horror unfolds not in a single moment, but across layers of exposure, strange rituals, deformed townsfolk, sunken architecture. At the climax, he discovers that he shares blood with the deep ones. His descent into madness is not due to fear. It is due to assimilation. His dreams become aquatic. His thoughts dissolve into something older. Eventually, he embraces his transformation. I shall dwell with the blessed ones. Here, madness is not rejection of reality, but submission to an alternative reality, one more ancient and enduring than the human. These examples illustrate a crucial distinction. In most horror, madness is the price of truth. In Lovecraft, madness is the proof that truth was encountered. The mind does not merely fail, it yields. The known world becomes insufficient. As the narrator of The Call of Cthulhu warns, the sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday, the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality. The pursuit of knowledge is not heroic. It is a slow unweaving of the self. We must pause here. Lovecraft often frames madness as narrative structure. His stories are told in retrospect by narrators who no longer trust their own memory. They recount dreams, hallucinations, fragments of documents, anything but direct experience. This creates epistemic uncertainty. What actually happened? What was imagined? That ambiguity is not accidental. It reflects the core idea that truth and sanity are mutually exclusive. To remain stable, the human mind must ignore vast portions of reality. Madness, then, becomes a form of unwanted clarity. Importantly, madness in Lovecraft is not dramatized through screaming or violence. It appears through linguistic decay. Narrators lose the ability to describe what they've seen. They fall back on phrases like unnameable, indescribable, or non-Euclidean. This failure is not lazy, it is thematic. Language fails because the concepts being described were never meant for human categories. The breakdown of syntax becomes a mirror for the breakdown of the self. Words, like minds, collapse under pressure. As we prepare to explore the function of forbidden knowledge in the next section, the role of madness becomes clear. It is not the end of the story. It is the medium through which cosmic knowledge is delivered. The hidden worlds do not merely haunt the present. They saturate it, waiting to be misread, half-remembered, or unearthed. And when that happens, the result is never revelation. It is epistemic collapse. Next, we turn to the texts, inscriptions, and artifacts that trigger this collapse, and ask what it means when knowing more leaves you with less certainty than before. In Lovecraft's universe, knowledge is not power, it is poison. The deeper one investigates, the less reality holds together. This is the central irony of his fiction. The very act of seeking truth results in its destruction. Forbidden knowledge in Lovecraft is not just dangerous because of what it reveals. It is dangerous because of what it unravels, not only in the world, but in the self. His hidden worlds are littered with records, symbols, and ruins, but none offer understanding. They offer exposure. And exposure, in this context, is corrosive. Consider the Necronomicon, perhaps the most infamous artifact in cosmic horror. We never read it directly. We encounter it through citations, rumors, and corrupted translations. Each reference adds to its mystique, yet the total effect is epistemic erosion. The more one consults the book, the less anchored one becomes in the world. In the Dunwich Horror, Dr. Armitage warns that the text should not be seen or handled except by mature students of occult lore. But maturity offers no immunity. The very existence of the book implies a cosmology so vast and hostile that reading it warps perception. The Necronomicon doesn't lie, it undoes. This pattern repeats across Lovecraft's work. In The Whisperer in Darkness, letters reveal evidence of non-human life in the Vermont hills. But as more data accumulates, footprints, brain transplants, recorded voices, the narrator's confidence collapses. He does not grow wiser. He grows unstable. Forbidden knowledge, in Lovecraft, never integrates into the existing worldview. It displaces it. The human mind has no shelf to store this material. It spills everywhere. It stains. The more accurate the discovery, the less survivable the aftermath. We must pause here. This is a reversal of the Enlightenment ideal. In most Western literature, knowledge banishes fear. In Lovecraft, it generates fear, not because it is false, but because it is more true than we are equipped to handle. This inversion transforms archives into hazards. Libraries become gateways. Maps are warnings misread as invitations. And beneath every act of research lies the same trap, the belief that more information leads to more control. Lovecraft exposes the flaw in this assumption. Sometimes to learn more is to lose the ability to interpret what one already knew. Language once again becomes a vector of this collapse. Ancient inscriptions often contain cursed knowledge, but the curse is not mystical, it is semiotic. The act of reading inserts a new structure into the reader's mind, a geometry that reshapes thought. In the Call of Cthulhu, the cult's chant, Fangluim Gulwinaf, Cthulhu Relieh, Wagahnagul Fadagan, is more than nonsense. It is a carrier. The syllables do not make sense, but they carry weight. The chant functions as both signal and symptom. To say it is to be infected with its logic. Meaning becomes invasive. A final example, in The Shadow Out of Time, the protagonist Peasley experiences a flood of historical memory from the great race of Yith. He recovers fragments, visions of future wars, extinct species, untranslatable symbols. But none of it fits. His brain struggles to contain what was never meant to be there. He writes, "I could not help feeling that they contained some hideous significance which I should not permit myself to attain." This line encapsulates the entire motif. The danger is not what you do with the knowledge. The danger is that you have it. This brings us to the function of epistemic collapse in Lovecraft's hidden worlds. The ruins, the texts, the carvings, they are not dead artifacts. They are active agents of destabilization. Once seen, they cannot be unseen. Once known, they cannot be unlearned. The final horror is not the thing itself. It is the cognitive ruin left behind. As we transition to the literary dimension of these ideas, we must examine how Lovecraft structured his stories to simulate this collapse. How the reader is drawn into the same spiral as the narrator. That spiral begins in the text and ends in the mind. The earliest glimpses of Lovecraft's hidden worlds appear not in grand narratives, but in fragments. Short stories where ruins, remnants, and half-forgotten civilizations loom larger than the characters themselves. These first appearances reveal a method Lovecraft would refine across his career. He does not build mythology through exposition, but through accumulated implication. In stories like Dagon, 1917, The Nameless City, 1921, and The Festival, 1923, we see ancient places as portals, not to other realms, but to other scales of existence. These tales establish a structural principle. What lies beneath is older, more complete, and radically inhuman. In Dagon, a World War I veteran, traumatized and adrift, recounts his accidental landing on a newly risen island in the Pacific. There, he encounters a vast monolith, carved with bas-reliefs of utterly unknown design and symbols, and witnesses a colossal amphibious being emerging from the sea. The story ends not with confrontation, but with dread that the island and its inhabitants are rising again. The narrative function is clear. Discovery equals doom. The past was never past. It was submerged, waiting. The island functions as an emergent memory of Earth, one that predates and disregards human life. Lovecraft here introduces the recurring motif of geological time as horror. The Nameless City is more explicit in its architectural dread. The unnamed narrator explores ruins in the Arabian desert that antedate the oldest known human civilization, noting that the buildings are scaled for non-human anatomy. Inside, murals depict a race of reptilian beings who once ruled the earth and were later buried by shifting sands and memory alike. As he descends into catacombs, he hears strange sounds and experiences a psychic vision of the ancient city's former life. The city's very structure tells its history, yet understanding it offers no safety. The key line, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die," encodes a core principle of the mythos. Time itself is not a barrier to return. The festival adds a new layer: ritual continuity. The narrator visits Kingsport for a traditional celebration and finds the town frozen in pre-modern architecture and culture. Beneath the town lies a hidden cavern filled with robed figures, unreadable tomes, and a river that leads into cosmic darkness. The rituals are not symbolic, they are functional. The ancient world persists not just in architecture, but in practice. The horror emerges not from physical decay, but from persistence. A civilization's beliefs and rituals have outlived the civilization itself. This blurs the line between culture and contagion. To witness the rites is to be absorbed into them. These early stories also reveal Lovecraft's evolving use of documentation as a narrative device. Rather than direct storytelling, he filters experience through personal accounts, journal entries, or posthumous confessions. This creates a distancing effect. What the reader receives is not the event, but its interpretation. This structure mirrors the academic experience of studying ancient civilizations. One never touches the event, only the trace. Lovecraft turns this into a mechanism of horror. If the event cannot be directly accessed, it also cannot be fully understood. The narrator of the Nameless City offers no final interpretation. He merely reports what he saw, what he thinks he saw, and what he cannot stop remembering. Another pattern becomes visible. Each early story isolates a particular form of access to the hidden world. Dagon uses geological upheaval. The Nameless City uses physical descent. The festival uses ritual time. None of these are controllable. They are accidental breaches, and in every case, the human agent becomes destabilized. These narratives resist climax in the traditional sense. The monster is glimpsed, the city is entered, the rite is joined, but no resolution follows. Lovecraft offers encounter, not conquest. The hidden world is never sealed off again. It remains open, temporarily accessible, permanently unresolved. This narrative strategy lays the groundwork for the mythos to come. Later stories will name the beings, chart the cities, and trace the documents, but these early texts establish the tone. Curiosity punished by perception. They show Lovecraft's growing belief that ancientness is not romantic, it is corrosive. The past is not inert. It presses forward, infecting the present through architecture, language, ritual, and memory. As we move to more complex narratives in the next sections, we will see how Lovecraft begins to thread these ancient structures into interconnected mythologies, where ruins speak across stories and civilizations long dead still exert narrative force. At the Mountains of Madness, 1936, is Lovecraft's most expansive engagement with hidden civilizations, and his most disciplined expression of archaeological horror. Set in Antarctica, the story unfolds through a scientific expedition that uncovers ancient ruins buried beneath the ice. What begins as geological curiosity escalates into the discovery of a vast abandoned city built by the Elder Things, a race that predated humanity by millions of years. The tale fuses scientific reportage, speculative biology, and narrative dread, producing a vision of Earth as the leftover stage of unknowable history. The deeper the expedition digs, the more fragile the human perspective becomes. What makes this story structurally unique is its documentation of the ruin itself. Lovecraft spends over half the narrative detailing murals, reliefs, and architectural anomalies. These descriptions are not digressions, they are the story. Through them, we learn the full arc of the Elder Things. Their arrival from space, their rise and decline, their wars with Cthulhu's spawn, their creation of the Shoggoths, and their eventual loss of control. But this sweeping history is not recounted by a narrator who understands it. It is inferred, hesitantly, through visuals and speculation. As Dyer notes, we deciphered the sprawling mural story of the dead race. That verb, deciphered, signals the epistemic instability. Everything is guesswork. The Elder Things themselves are presented not as villains, but as unknowable predecessors. Described as barrel-shaped, star-headed organisms with radial symmetry, they are biologically alien, but intellectually familiar. They practice science, art, and architecture. Their civilization is meticulous. Lovecraft deliberately humanizes their intelligence while dehumanizing their form. This creates unease. We relate to their curiosity and order, yet recoil from their physicality. The horror is not their cruelty, it's their resemblance. They are not demonic, they are too close. As Dyer reflects, poor devils, radiates, vegetables, monstrosities, star spawn, whatever they had been, they were men. The true destabilizing force in the story, however, is the Shoggoth. Created as labor by the Elder Things, these protoplasmic entities eventually rebel. 1. Remains alive beneath the city, repeating phrases in a borrowed voice. Tekeli-li, Tekeli-li. This mimicry of language without understanding presents a horrifying inversion of culture. The Shoggoth is not evil, it is residual. It persists without context, long after its creators are gone. Its presence in the story is not climactic, but thematic. It embodies the danger of survival without comprehension. Evolution continues, but meaning decays. We must pause here. At the Mountains of Madness dramatizes Lovecraft's core belief that science, when practiced honestly, leads to existential horror. The expedition uncovers knowledge, geological, biological, historical, but this knowledge destabilizes rather than empowers. The past, once revealed, does not add to human understanding. It diminishes it. The planet is older than thought. Life was shaped by others. Humanity is not a culmination, but a byproduct. The narrator warns that these truths ought not to be told. Not because they are false, but because they are correct. Accuracy is the threat. Structurally, the story functions as a false report. It opens with an appeal not to repeat the expedition. The narrative is a containment effort, not a confession. This frames the story as damage control, a failed attempt to seal away a truth that has already leaked. The Antarctic setting reinforces the theme. It is a blankness, geographic, historical, moral. In this void, the ruins rise. The further from civilization the characters travel, the more they are confronted by the remains of something greater. At the Mountains of Madness is Lovecraft's clearest vision of a hidden world fully unearthed. And it is worse because it is comprehensible. The horror is not that the city is unknowable, but that it is knowable in parts. Those parts imply a whole that dwarfs humanity, yet remains only partially seen. In the next section, we turn to the shadow out of time, where Lovecraft shifts from ruins in space to memories, in time, and where the past is no longer buried beneath ice, but implanted within the mind. The shadow. Out of Time, 1936, takes Lovecraft's hidden world motif and transposes it from physical space to mental continuity. Where At the Mountains of Madness excavates a city, this story excavates a consciousness. The protagonist, Professor Nathaniel Peaslee, suffers a multi-year fugue state during which his body is inhabited by a non-human intelligence from the distant past. When he regains control, he begins piecing together fragments, dreams, visions, and anomalies that suggest his mind had been temporarily exchanged with that of a being from the great race of Yith, a species that lives hundreds of millions of years ago and survives by projecting its intellect across time. This narrative reframing is significant. Instead of ruins or documents, the hidden world is accessed through memory. But it is not personal memory. It is ancestral, imposed, and radically disorienting. Peaslee's experience destabilizes the boundary between self and history. As he notes, I shivered at the unreality of the tangible scene, the relics of unthinkable epics, the still surviving things that had once reared towers to heaven. The implication is clear. The ancient world is not merely underfoot or underwater. It's inside us, waiting to surface through dreams, trauma, or unknown forces of mind. The great race themselves are unique within Lovecraft's mythos. Unlike the elder things or deep ones, they are not tied to a specific place or biological form. Their civilization spans eras, hosts, and planets. They do not travel through space. They migrate through minds. What they value is knowledge, not territory. Their libraries contain the thoughts of species extinct for billions of years. And when extinction looms, they transfer their minds again, abandoning old bodies like outworn tools. Theirs is a civilization of pure continuity, one that treats time as a resource to be mined. We must pause here. The Shadow Out of Time is perhaps Lovecraft's most fully realized meditation on epistemic instability. Peaslee cannot distinguish between dream, vision, memory, and fact. He researches his own fugue state, discovers similar cases across history, and slowly constructs the hypothesis that he was temporarily inhabited. But the evidence remains fragmentary. Notes, ruins, and artifacts glimpsed in dreams. The climax occurs not through revelation, but confirmation. He visits the Australian desert and uncovers the very ruins he saw in his visions. Their reality breaks him. I do not ask that my tale be believed, he says. I only say that I heard and that I know. The terror lies not in uncertainty, but in certainty without comprehension. The architecture of the Yithian city mirrors this mental dislocation. It is filled with massive chambers, cylindrical towers, and libraries whose contents span galaxies. But the city is dead. Its brilliance is not comforting. It is accusatory. It survived too long, preserved too much. Lovecraft makes clear that what is horrifying is not loss of knowledge, but excess. To know everything is to know one's irrelevance. To walk through halls that once housed minds older than Earth is to realize that history has already rendered you obsolete. The story also introduces a motif of hidden continuity. Peaslee discovers that his case is not unique. Other individuals across history have suffered similar mental displacements, often dismissed as madness. This retroactive connection builds mythological depth. The Yithians are not local to one story. They are a pattern, a recurring phenomenon that crosses generations and locations. This layering technique allows Lovecraft to imply a network of influence and intrusion that spans his entire mythos. The hidden world is no longer a place. It is a structure, in time, in thought, in myth. Ultimately, The Shadow Out of Time transforms the reader's sense of scale. If ancient civilizations can implant memories across eons, then the mind itself becomes untrustworthy. History invades identity, and knowledge, once again, becomes the destabilizing force. As Peaslee concludes, "My name is not Peaslee. The past has overwritten him." In the next section, we'll explore how later writers and collaborators expanded these ideas, sometimes deepening them, sometimes diluting them, and what happens when Lovecraft's hidden worlds pass into other hands. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, the hidden worlds he imagined did not vanish. They metastasized. His collaborators, admirers, and literary heirs expanded the mythos in all directions, adding names, hierarchies, and cosmological systems. Chief among them was August Derleth, who preserved Lovecraft's legacy through Arkham House, but also reinterpreted his vision through a theological lens. Where Lovecraft's ancient civilizations embodied indifference and decay, Derleth recast them as forces. In a moral struggle, categorizing entities as elder gods, benevolent, and great old ones, malevolent. This binary structure flattens Lovecraft's cosmology, turning cold, uncaring vastness into spiritual allegory. The result is more accessible, but less unsettling. Derleth introduced the notion of elemental alignment, assigning beings to earth, air, fire, and water. Cthulhu, once a symbolic convergence of entropy and memory, became a water entity aligned with evil. Nodens, briefly mentioned by Lovecraft, was elevated to a protective elder god. This shift reframed the mythos as a metaphysical battleground. But in doing so, Derleth inverted Lovecraft's intent. The horror was no longer rooted in scale or indifference. It became moral transgression. Hidden worlds were reduced to forbidden zones in a cosmic war. The ancient civilizations of Yith, R'lyeh, and the Dreamlands lost their ambiguity. They became strategic terrain. Other collaborators took different paths. Clark Ashton Smith and Robert E. Howard integrated Lovecraftian elements into their own mythologies without moralizing them. Smith's ancient worlds, like Hyperborea and Zothique, echoed Lovecraft's sense of deep time, but leaned into decadence and fatalism rather than cosmic nihilism. His civilizations are often beautiful in ruin, elaborate, doomed, and self-aware. Howard, best known for Conan the Barbarian, embedded pre-human ruins and forbidden cults into his heroic fantasy, suggesting ancient horrors beneath heroic landscapes. These adaptations preserved Lovecraft's themes, but transposed them into new tonal registers: gothic wonder, grim heroism, decadent melancholy. We must pause here. Expansion is not always distortion. Later writers introduced innovations Lovecraft could not, or would not, explore. Ramsey Campbell relocated the mythos to England, threading local folklore into cosmic dread. Caitlin R. Kiernan's work re-infuses the mythos with epistemological instability, exploring psychological disintegration through science and trauma. These modern voices return to the central premise, that hidden worlds are not secrets to be solved, but architectures of dread. They reject the neat categories imposed by Derleth and restore ambiguity as the primary horror. The Dreamlands, in particular, became a contested site of interpretation. Lovecraft imagined them as a realm accessed through dreams, layered with cities, landscapes, and ruins untouched by waking history. Posthumous expansions often treated them as literal other dimensions. Brian Lumley's Titus Crow series, for instance, turns the Dreamlands into an adventuring ground where protagonists fight back against the mythos. While imaginative, this treatment clashes with the original tone. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, the dreamlands are not heroic. They are allegorical, unstable, and recursive. The horror is not in being attacked. It is in realizing the dream knows you. This evolution reveals a key tension. Lovecraft's mythos thrives on implication, but collaborative expansions often favor explanation. His hidden civilizations work because they are glimpsed, not mapped. Later editions risk over-defining what was meant to remain unresolved. The more ruins are named, categorized, and populated, the less they disturb. Horror gives way to taxonomy. The ancient becomes familiar. The unknowable becomes collectible. And yet, the mythos persists. Even diluted, it exerts gravitational pull. Writers, filmmakers, and readers return to these buried cities, non-Euclidean ruins, and pre-human races not because they offer clarity, but because they suggest the opposite. Lovecraft's greatest legacy may not be the content of his stories, but the structure of unknowing he built. As we move into the final part of this analysis, we turn from literature to culture itself. How did these hidden worlds escape fiction and bleed into myth, conspiracy, and belief? What happens when imaginary ruins begin to shape real fears? That drift from fiction to folklore is the final boundary we now cross. Lovecraft's hidden worlds were never meant to be believed, yet over time they began to resemble the very myths they were designed to undermine. Stories of buried civilizations, impossible ruins, and ancient non-human builders have since escaped the confines of fiction and bled into modern folklore, conspiracy theory, and fringe archaeology. In forums, podcasts, and YouTube deep dives, references to ancient astronauts, polar openings, and sunken cities often echo Lovecraft's architecture and chronology, even when his name goes unmentioned. The line between invented mythos and speculative reality has eroded, and this erosion reveals something unsettling about our cultural psyche. Take the recurring myth of a pre-human Antarctic civilization. Popularized in the 20th century through fringe interpretations of Admiral Byrd's expeditions, this idea maps neatly onto At the Mountains of Madness, ancient alien ruins beneath the ice, a government cover-up, a knowledge too dangerous to disclose. In online subcultures, Lovecraft's fiction is often cited as predictive programming, an occult truth hidden in plain sight. The appeal lies not in historical accuracy, but in psychological structure. These myths offer a world that is larger, older, and more haunted than official narratives allow. They reject modernity's flattening timelines and return us to a layered universe, one where the past can still reach up through the present. Urban legends have adopted similar contours. In Reddit threads, TikTok videos, and image boards, users share accounts of vanished towns, tunnels beneath cities, and liminal spaces that echo the dreamland's logic. These stories are rarely coherent. They often begin with a dream, a map, or a strange phrase. Back rooms, the stairs in the woods, the door that wasn't there. Yesterday. What matters is not resolution, but atmosphere. Like Lovecraft's narrators, participants describe encounters with space and memory that feel unstable, too old, too deep. The haunted house has become a haunted world, and its inhabitants are not ghosts, but remnants. Games have embraced this unease with remarkable fidelity. Titles like Bloodborne, Control, and Returnal use architectural disorientation, impossible geometry, and lost memory to simulate the experience of uncovering buried histories. Bloodborne, in particular, fuses cosmic horror with archaeological descent. The player explores ancient tombs beneath a ruined city, each layer revealing older and more disturbing truths. There are no clear timelines, only stacked catastrophes. The game never confirms whether these ruins are real, dreamed, or remembered. It simply asks the player to keep descending. That structure mirrors Lovecraft's deepest insight, that horror emerges when time no longer progresses, but folds. We must pause here. The persistence of these themes is not simply the result of fandom or homage. It reflects a deeper anxiety about lost meaning. In an age saturated with data and severed from tradition, the idea of an ancient, coherent world, however terrifying, offers a form of narrative gravity. Even if the world is indifferent, at least it was something. The ruins speak, even if we can't translate them. Lovecraft's mythos endures not because it provides answers, but because it models a world where questions still echo across the abyss. This has led to a strange convergence between fiction and belief. Some occult communities treat Lovecraft's entities as real forces, archetypal, if not literal. Chaos magicians have invoked Nyarlathotep in ritual. Online grimoires blend Necronomicon lore with older esoteric texts. Even mainstream fiction has absorbed this ambiguity. In The X-Files, True Detective, and The Endless, the boundary between story and mythology collapses. The viewer is no longer certain whether the horror is supernatural or psychological, or if the distinction even matters. What emerges from this cultural afterlife is not a unified belief, but a pattern of longing. A longing for depth in a shallow information landscape. A longing for continuity in a fragmented world. A longing to touch something vast, even if it unravels us. Lovecraft's hidden worlds fulfill that longing precisely because they remain incomplete. They cannot be systematized. They are not puzzles with solutions. They are thresholds, and thresholds persist. In the sections to come, we will follow these patterns through film, games, academia, and subculture. But we will not search for final meanings. Hidden worlds endure because they refuse finality. They invite us to look, to listen, to descend, never to arrive. Lovecraft's hidden worlds were not designed for the screen, yet their influence has seeped into film, games, and music with remarkable persistence. The core challenge is structural. His horrors emerge through implication, uncertainty, and collapse. These are difficult to visualize. Hollywood tends to favor spectacle and resolution, two things antithetical to cosmic horror. Yet despite this, filmmakers and game designers have repeatedly returned to Lovecraft's ruins, alien cities, and submerged empires, not to adapt them directly, but to echo them. In doing so, they preserve his central theme, that behind the visible world lies something vast, ancient, and deeply wrong. In cinema, explicit adaptations like The Resurrected or The Dunwich Horror often fall flat, bound by limited budgets and dated aesthetics. But indirect adaptations succeed precisely because they do not try to depict Lovecraft's visions literally. The Thing, 1982, relocates at the Mountains of Madness to a contemporary Antarctic setting, featuring an alien intelligence buried in ice, fragments of an unknown civilization, and a creeping epistemic breakdown among the researchers. The creature's form is mutable, its origin unclear. The horror is not just that it kills, but that it replaces. The ruins are no longer stone, they are biological. Identity becomes architecture. Games, however, have proven uniquely capable of expressing Lovecraftian space. In Bloodborne, players descend through a Gothic city into subterranean catacombs built by an ancient, pre-human race. Each level becomes more abstract, less intelligible. Statues dissolve into bone, Walls shift geometries, and memory itself decays. The deeper the player goes, the more the logic of the world disintegrates. There are no clear answers, only older horrors. As with Lovecraft's cities, the architecture tells the story, but never explains it. You interpret by movement, not exposition, and interpretation only deepens uncertainty. Control, 2019, takes a different approach. Set within the oldest house, a brutalist skyscraper housing a paranormal agency, the game features constantly shifting interiors, floating objects, and archives filled with redacted documents. Its design echoes the bureaucratic madness of The Shadow Out of Time and The Whisperer in Darkness. The building feels alive, yet indifferent. Its rooms defy physics. Its secrets are never fully uncovered. Instead of a single horror, Control presents an infrastructure of uncertainty. Like Lovecraft's texts, its horror emerges through layers of documentation that reveal too much, and yet not enough. Music, too, has absorbed Lovecraft's spatial dread. Dark ambient and drone artists, such as Lustmord, Atrium Carcery, and Nada, create soundscapes that simulate the feeling of walking through an empty, echoing ruin. These compositions are structured less like songs and more like environments, deep rumbles, reverberating tones, indistinct whispers. Listening to them is not about melody. It is about immersion in absence. These works do not adapt Lovecraft. They simulate his environments. The Iaki listener does not hear a story. They enter a forgotten world. We must pause here. Across all these mediums, one element recurs: decay without explanation. Whether it's the frozen alien base in The Thing, the impossible corridors of Control, or the crumbling temples in Bloodborne, the environment is always older than the story. It precedes the protagonist and will outlast them. There is no climactic revelation, only the slow realization that the setting itself remembers. In this way, Lovecraft's ancient civilizations live on not through characters or lore, but through design principles. The ruin is the message. These adaptations persist not because they repeat Lovecraft's plots, but because they replicate his structure of dread. Viewers and players are not told what to fear. They are given fragments: visual, sonic, architectural, and left to assemble their own cosmology. This mirrors Lovecraft's own method: partial documents, unreliable narrators, illegible inscriptions. The result is not comprehension, but a deepening sense that something has been missed, or misread, or misunderstood. And that feeling lingers. As we move forward, we'll examine how these themes have taken root in subcultures and academic discourse. For if films and games allow us to explore Lovecraft's hidden worlds, subcultures allow us to live in their margins, to adopt them as symbols, metaphors, or even beliefs. The horror survives not just in media, but in identity. The ruins have found new forms. Lovecraft's hidden worlds have found strange new life in the margins of culture, not just in stories and games, but in identities, aesthetics, and intellectual frameworks. Across online subcultures, occult circles, and even academic theory, his buried cities and ancient civilizations are no longer just fiction. They have become symbols of alienation, of lost knowledge, of a universe that does not care if we exist. The mythos has shifted from narrative to lens, adopted by those who feel that reality itself is layered, unstable, and withholding. In this way, Lovecraft's ruins have been transformed into something living, not real, but believed in. Among esoteric communities, particularly within chaos magic and left-hand occult traditions, Lovecraft's entities have been absorbed into ritual practice. figures like Nyarlathotep and Azathoth are invoked not as literal gods, but as archetypes of disorder, entropy, or cosmic disjunction. The Simon Necronomicon, a 1970s occult text purporting to contain real rites derived from Lovecraft, blurs fiction and belief so deliberately that some practitioners insist it works regardless of its origins. Here, Lovecraft's mythos functions as mythopoesis, invented symbols used to restructure meaning. It is not belief in the myth that matters. It is the act of using it to rewrite one's relationship to the unknown. This dynamic also appears in digital subcultures, in liminal space photography, dreamcore aesthetics, and analog horror series like Local 58 or Gemini Home Entertainment. Users create media that feels ancient, fragmentary, and unstable. Many of these works contain references, subtle or overt, to Lovecraftian ideas, a signal from deep space, a ritual encoded in a children's cartoon, a facility that houses something older than the Earth. These communities don't cite Lovecraft directly, but his influence is felt in structure, fragmentary storytelling, ancient knowledge framed through modern media, dread emerging from pattern recognition. The mythos has become atmospheric. Academia, too, has reappropriated Lovecraft, not to venerate him, but to mine his structures of thought. Philosophers like Eugene Thacker and Reza Negarestani explore his fiction as a model for unhuman thought, the kind that emerges when we attempt to think beyond biology, culture, or coherence. Thacker's In the Dust of This Planet treats Lovecraft as a philosopher of the world without us, where horror is the encounter with what exists entirely outside human reference. In this view, Lovecraft's hidden civilizations are not just old, they are ontologically dislocated. They represent a form of being that does not intersect with our logic or desires. We must pause here. These appropriations, occult, subcultural, philosophical, often contradict one another. Some treat the mythos as metaphor, others treat it as metaphysics, but all share a recognition that Lovecraft's horror is not grounded in events or creatures, but in structures that resist understanding. His cities are not settings, they are ideas, of scale, of indifference, of incomprehensibility. In adopting those structures, these communities inherit his core insight, that knowledge may exist without us, and meaning may not survive its discovery. Importantly, this reappropriation has not always been benign. Lovecraft's personal racism, especially his belief in cultural degeneration and fear of the other, has drawn intense criticism. Some subcultures have wrestled with this directly, recasting the mythos as a space of resistance, where marginalized identities explore alienation through cosmic imagery. Others have uncritically replicated his structures, allowing xenophobic or fatalistic narratives to persist unchallenged. The question is not whether the mythos survives, it is how it mutates in different hands. The ruins remain, but who walks among them and why continues to shift. As we move to the final section, we turn from culture to psychology. If these ruins, whether architectural or symbolic, persist across time and subculture, what does that say about us? What human impulse continues to return to these buried places, these silent chambers beneath consciousness? The final horror may not lie in the ruins themselves, but in our inability to stop searching for them. We are drawn to ruins, not despite their decay, but because of it. In Lovecraft's work, ancient cities, buried, civilizations, and forgotten empires persist as psychological shadows. They represent more than lost history. They embody the failure of meaning itself. His hidden worlds are not merely old, They are indifferent. They do not mourn their fall. They do not offer lessons. They simply are, vast and silent. And in returning to them, over and over, in fiction, games, dreams, rituals, we confront something that has nothing to say to us. That silence is the source of their enduring power. Psychologically, Lovecraft's hidden civilizations resonate because they reflect a core existential anxiety, the fear that human culture is temporary, local, and ultimately irrelevant. This is not nihilism in a shallow sense. It is a confrontation with time at its most brutal scale. In The Shadow Out of Time, the protagonist discovers that his own mind was briefly displaced by a being from hundreds of millions of years ago. He learns that the human era is a flicker between vast epochs of non-human thought. The horror lies not in hostility, but in displacement. We are not attacked. We are ignored. This anxiety is not limited to fiction. In an era defined by environmental collapse, digital impermanence, and cultural fragmentation, Lovecraft's ruins feel prophetic. They model a world where civilization is not a triumph, but a layer, one among many, all destined to erode. His cities do not end with apocalypse. They fade, like memory, like language, like species. This slow erosion is more terrifying than destruction because it offers no climax, only drift. The idea that something once vast and intelligent could vanish so completely unsettles our deepest assumptions about progress, legacy, and visibility. We must pause here. Lovecraft's mythos is often described as a horror of the unknown, but the hidden worlds he constructs suggest something subtler, a horror of the once known. These are not mysteries waiting to be solved. They are meanings that have already been lost. His stories are filled with texts that cannot be read, cities that cannot be mapped, knowledge that cannot be reintegrated. The reader is not invited to decipher, but to witness failure. The function of these narratives is not to reveal, but to erode, to simulate what it feels like when understanding breaks down, and yet we return to them. In reading Lovecraft, in adapting his ideas, in dreaming his ruins into new forms, we engage in a peculiar ritual, one of voluntary destabilization. We explore not to master, but to feel small. This suggests a paradox. The very horror that denies us meaning gives rise to a kind of freedom. If nothing lasts, then nothing binds us. If no civilization endures, then no worldview is absolute. The ruins do not answer, but their silence makes room for other voices, new fears, new stories, new questions. Lovecraft's hidden worlds endure not because they satisfy, but because they withhold. They promise depth without bottom, architecture without center, time without direction. This resonates with the modern condition. We live amid broken systems, fragmented histories, and collapsing narratives. His ruins feel familiar because we, too, are surrounded by remnants of ideologies, cultures, species. We are already living in the aftermath, and so we look backward, not in hope, but in recognition. There is no final insight to offer, no ultimate decoding of Lovecraft's vision. The ruins remain. The names remain, the fear remains, and perhaps that is the point. That in the absence of answers, we return again and again, not to escape meaning, but to remember that it was never guaranteed. The descent continues.